Okay, everyone, so picking up right where we left off, what we're going to do is we're going to pause and we're going to clean up the code because it turned out there were a few things happening that weren't really evident. And so I'll be able to demonstrate how to catch that, demonstrate what was happening and how to prevent it in the future, as well as making this more scalable going forward. So we've got the basic functionality into place. Now we want to clean it up a little bit, tighten it up a little bit, put in a few more controls. So first thing is we've been juggling this wall that's in the scene by default and the prefab. Well, we really don't have to do much more with this one. We could just get rid of it. So it's found and gone. We no longer have to code for both of them. That will change. We will have to change our code a little bit because this one was being referenced, and now we have to set it up such as this one is being referenced. So when you go to the main camera, that object is gone, so block object is gone. So rather than referring down to that object in the scene, it's now going to refer to the prefab. Don't worry about current focus. I'll explain that variable in a minute. What I did is because the changes were so extensive, and I didn't want this video to run on a couple hours, I've made some of the changes already, and I'll explain them. And then we'll go through with the rest of the changes. If you find that you get lost, I'll see if I can make the text, the code available maybe on Pastebin or something like that. So we deleted our wall. We clicked on our main camera. We put the prefab into the block object variable. And now we go to our scripts. There should not be any changes in the wall con script. Please double check the variables, but I don't believe there's anything new there. This was the current rotation in the placement status. We added those in the first video. This is wall object where it refers to itself. We might be able to get rid of that because the main reason was because the wall here had to refer to the place, the prefab. So we might be able to get rid of that variable. The three materials, that's not new. The cube object, that's not new. The cube object is so this, basically the empty parent is aware of the child. Let's see what else we have. Wall HP, we already covered that. We covered that when we added the textures. But as the texture changes, the HP changes as well. In the start section, the three vectors, don't think that's definitely not anything new. We did that in the first video. In the update section, if the A button is pressed and place status is not equal to set, then rotate the object. That's not new. That's just the rotation with the A key. If space is placed, if the space button is pressed, then this variable is set to set. And I'm going to always regret using the word set since I keep repeating myself. It instantiates at the wall object. The default wall, it instantiates the wall object with the wall object's default position and the wall object's default rotation. That is position, rotation. We will eventually change that so that it instantiates at what you're currently looking at, because obviously if you've gone 20 or 30 or 50 units to the left, you don't want the next one to instantiate all the way over here. Input get key down, that's just the number 1 key. That was to make sure, that was how you selected to use the wood material. Shouldn't be anything new there. Pressing the 2 button down, that was how you selected the stone material, and pressing 3 is how you selected the metal. So it looks like there is not any new code there. I just wanted to check to make sure. Today's actually been a rather long day because this took a lot longer to make work than I thought it would. I actually had to learn how to do something that I'd never done before, which we're going to get to in just a minute. Okay, so player con script, this is where this changes. This you should already have the block object. That is what refers to the prefab. This is new. So public transform current focus OBJ. In short, And this is another reason why I didn't want to write the code out line by line because, like I said, it would take so long because of the explanations. So here's the thing. We have a variable that refers to this prefab. When you instantiate it into the scene, okay, that variable is referring to this prefab. It is not referring to the object in the scene. Well, what if we want to make changes to that object? That means we need a new variable to address that object, and that's what this new variable does. So the first variable is the prefab. The second variable will be set to the object that gets placed in the scene. And that's the functionality that I was talking about. I'd never done that before. So public transform current focus underscore obj, that is going to be used for the object that gets instantiated. Now, why focus? That's a database term. Actually might be used in other places too. But when you have something highlighted, you have something selected, that's called the focus. So in a database, whatever, like you say you're on a form and you have like that outline that shows up around things that are selected, that's called the focus. So the current focus, in other words, the current piece of structure that you're moving around. So public transform block object, public transform current focus underscore obj, public vector 3 current grid equals new vector 3 0 0 0. So what this is doing is we're going to start looking at the grid position. So as I said, when the new grid, when the new wall piece gets instantiated, we want it to show up at the current grid. So that's what this variable is going to be used for. This variable is going to grab the coordinates of whatever grid is currently being focused on. Had to set something by default, so we'll set it to 0 0 0. But that's what this is going to be used for. We're going to use this as a way to catch the capture the location of whichever grid you're looking at. Because remember, each place that you can build is a grid location. Each grid location has coordinates. So we want to know what coordinates you're looking at. So that's what I was mentioning earlier when I said that we don't want to instantiate. If you don't mind, I'll jump back here for a second. I said we're instantiating at the wall object's default location. Well, we don't want to do that. We want to instantiate where you are. And so that's what that's going to be used for. So again, my apologies. Like I said, between the explaining and the typing, this probably would have taken hours. So I'm trying to focus on the explanation, whereas typing is just that, typing. It's data entry. Did not add anything to the start section. In the update section, this, I believe, is all the same. So if the Q key is pressed, that moves your character, well, the camera to the left. If the W key is pressed, it moves it to the right. If neither key is pressed, then it brings to a halt. You're not moving at all. Okay, so I'm going to jump to a text file, and I'm going to paste in what we've got going on next. Okay, so from the syntax, you can tell that this is looking for a key press. So what this is going to do is, up to this point, there was a wall piece by default in the scene. Well, we don't want that. What we want to do is have you be able to enter like a construction or a build mode. So we're going to use the letter B. You press B, and that instantiates the first object. It spawns the first object in the scene. So rather than it being there by default, now you have to call it. You have to instantiate it. So input.getKeyDown, again, you want getKeyDown instead of getKey. That way this only happens once. I actually made a mistake and did getKey, probably because I was looking at these that said getKey. And it instantiated like 1,000 of these as soon as I pressed the B button. So input.getKeyDown B, so it's looking to see if the B button is being pressed. Anything in here will be executed when the B button is pressed. Again, only for that single frame when it first is pressed down. Current focus equals transform instantiate block object, comma, current grid, comma, block object dot rotation. So I hope you're starting to see why I kind of did this all ahead of time, because it would be juggling. I'd have to type something out, then jump up here, type that in, then jump back here. So hopefully that the explanation kind of fills in the gaps. So this is a little bit different. I'd never done this before. I'd never had associated or put or named, I should say, a prefab. You would just name the prefab and life goes, you would just instantiate the prefab and life goes on. Now by doing this, we can make changes to the object that has been instantiated. Okay, so this is what I was saying. There's a difference between this object and the one that gets put in here. They're now two separate objects, just as they were when we had one in here by default. So one variable refers to this one variable is going to refer to the one that's in here. Now this is going to look a little wonky. Basically, Unity has a range of objects, and so you have to specify what type of object it is. So if I'm correct, instantiate is considered, I don't think it's considered a game object. I think it's just called object, and yes, there is a difference. So what you have to do is you have to convert it. As you noticed at the top here, we said it's a transform. Well, we have to do the transform, because if you don't do the transform, when you try changing the coordinates, you get an error message saying that's not there. So be mindful of types. I really don't want to get into a discussion about that right now. It's kind of a sore point with me that Unity makes it so complex, but keep in mind, just have that parity, that this is a transform variable, and so therefore what gets put into it has to be a transform. So current focus equals transform in parentheses, and then this should look familiar. Instantiate, block object, current grid, block object rotation. And again, current grid is here. Okay, so right now you would say, okay, why current grid is a variable if you just do that with it, if you just set it. Again, we just need a default value. We're now going to get into what is really going to be current grid. So I'm going to jump back to the text file. We'll copy this. So yeah, you can either delete the void on trigger enter, or you could just modify it either way. So this needs to be outside of the update section. And again, typing this out one step at a time would have been a disaster, not to mention the amount of errors I might have made. So just let me know, like I said, if you want this on paste bin or something, I'll see what I can do, so you can just copy and paste it. So void on trigger enter collider other. Nothing new there. Anything in here will occur when this collision occurs, and this only occurs for the first frame in which the entry happens. Now this is what we weren't doing before. We were simply saying if it collided with an other, then go ahead and do some stuff. I had to change this. I had to put in an extra condition. If other.name equals grid collider, these are the grid colliders, because what was happening is the collider on this was colliding with the collider on this, and that's what was causing it to do these little half jumps. I don't know if I showed that in one of my other videos, or if maybe when you were testing it, you had the same thing happen, but it was causing these little half jumps because this just looks for any trigger collision. Well, the trigger collision was happening between the main camera and the block, as opposed to the main camera and the grid collider. So I hope I didn't butcher that explanation. So again, there is the collisions we were looking for was this with these, but what was happening is this was colliding with this because this also has a box collider, or to be specific, the instantiated one in here. So this was getting instantiated and the main camera was colliding with it rather than the grid. So this is what I was saying about cleaning up the code and putting in some controls. We weren't previously checking to see what object it was colliding with. We were presuming, or should I say I was the one who made the video, so it was my fault. I was presuming that it was only colliding with the grid collider. So that's the kind of thing you have to look out for. That's the kind of control you have to put into place to make sure that you are preventing these other events from happening that you don't even realize are there. Okay, so that's the first change in the onTrigger, is we're now checking to see if the object that is being collided with has the name grid collider. So that's just other.name equals grid collider. Now, if that happens, then this occurs. So this is simply an expansion of what we've already done. This says if current focus, so again, the new object that's been instantiated into the scene, if that new object, if its WallCon component, and let's take a look at that. So just as there's a transform component and there's a box collider component, you can actually reference the script itself. This is also something I'd never done. So you can actually reference the script as a component. And whereas these have fixed names, this component will be the name of the script. So if you try doing get component script, won't work. You do get component and then specifically the name of the script. So that's the other thing that, as I said, I had to learn how to do. I had never done that before. So let's take a look. So if current focused dot get component, which component? The WallCon script. Okay, what element of the WallCon script? The place status is not equal to set. In other words, we're checking this. So you can actually check this via get component. You're doing it because this object, the main camera, is aware of the current focus object. So the object's been instantiated. It gets dropped into this variable. Now you're able to make changes to it. And so you can do that. You can drill down into the script. So I'm saying, okay, is the place status not equal to set? It's not equal to set, so then we want something to happen. We want it to move. That's what we were doing before. We're having it move, but we weren't checking the value of place status. So those are the two controls we put into place here. Whether or not the name of the object, the collision with the camera, is called grid collider, and whether or not the object, in this case, the current focus object, its place status is not equal to set. If those two conditions have been met, then the current focus, again, the object we just created, get component transform.position equals, and then this is pretty straightforward because we've already looked at this before, other.transform.position x. So this is the x coordinate. You're just saying that the x coordinate is going to be the x coordinate from this. Again, you're drilling down from the general to the specific. I apologize if I keep saying that, but I'm trying to explain. If this looks weird, that's what you're doing. You're drilling down from specific to general. From general to specific, my apologies. Again, other.transform.position.y. Again, this is the y coordinate. You're just saying that this y coordinate is going to be equal to the y coordinate of that object. And then again, here. All right, so I believe that takes care of all the changes. There will still be an error that doesn't break it, and it has to do with the fact that this isn't giving an object by default because we set it here. And the final change we will make in the WallCon script, and it will also require one more change here. For WallCon, we press space and we instantiate an object. In PlayerCon, we also instantiate an object. Typically, you don't want to do that. So right now what's happening is this variable is storing this instantiated object. It is not doing so here. So you can either make that variable static, or you can consolidate this functionality. So let's first remark that out since we don't need that at the moment. And then what we're going to do, let's remark this out, but we're actually going to get rid of it. So all that happens now is place status gets place status is equal to set. That's the value it gets set to. And again, kicking myself for using the word set. So that's all hitting the space button will do here. What we'll do is here, we'll add it. So if B is pressed, or it's the pipe symbol, which is you hold shift and press the button that's above the enter key, also has the backslash, that's the pipe. And, excuse me, or. So input.getKey down B, or input.getKey down space. So you do have the redundant checking of the space key, but at least you don't have the redundant instantiate, particularly when it makes such a big difference here. I think that should do it. So if we hit space, the current object has place status equal to set, and the new object, yeah, so the instantiate got eliminated. And let's see if at long last, well, long last for me, I've been working on this all day. So we press B, it rotates, it moves, press space, it moves, it rotates. Perfect. I'm going to go cry myself to sleep now because it took like 6 hours to make this work. So it still doesn't look like much, but you really have a lot of the core functionality of base building now. So you have the ability to choose a block, to rotate it, to change what it's made out of. We already added some attributes as far as HP. You can, we now have basically a building mode because there isn't one there by default. And like I said, we could do something like add a key press for, say, escape, and escape would destroy the current object, that kind of thing. So you could do something like, now that the instantiated object has its own variable, you could do something like destroy current focus. I'd have to check the actual syntax, but I'm pretty sure you could do that. So that's about it. I hope this has been helpful. I'm sorry for the different format where some of the stuff was already typed out, but like I said, the explanation in itself was a bit convoluted, and then to try to type this out in layers just made no sense to me. That I would have to type something out and then explain why it was wrong and then type it out again. I'm like, ultimately, the only thing that's going to work is the final code. So that should do it. I hope this has been helpful.